Welcome to Good Game, a podcast for crypto insiders with your hosts Imran and Qiao. Welcome back to episode 6 with Qiao and I at Good Game. The last couple of weeks, a lot's happened. You probably heard about the sudden rise of art gobblers, which has been in the works for the past 6 months. And so Qiao and I decided to dedicate this episode to NFTs just generally. What are our thoughts, what we're excited about, and maybe some history lessons. Before we get started, anything top of mind for you, Qiao?
We have a couple questions from our audience, and I really want to touch upon those. One is the difference between the various chains, the various layer ones, in the context of NFTs. You know, how are the cultures different between Solana and Ethereum, for example? I also want to talk about your bag of NFT, our bags.
Our bags.
What are some of the specific collections that we're excited about? Obviously not financial advice, but I think that's gonna be super fun to talk about. But yeah, let's do it.
Great. I think we should go back in time, back in 2017 when you and I were just trying to figure out what was happening. EIP 721 was introduced by this guy named Dieter, Shirley, and 3 other folks that proposed it. The idea was supposed to be just simple, create a standard interface for non-fungible tokens, aka they called it deeds at the time.
Dieter is the CTO of Kitties, right?
Oh, you're right. He is. That actually makes a lot of sense. You're right. Good call out. And what was interesting was while that was being proposed and launched, in parallel to this, Kitties launched as well. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And if you guys don't know what Kitties is, the idea is pretty simple, similar to Axie Infinity, where you're breeding, creating, buying digital cats. And it's more of a kind of gamification method where you're having fun just creating different types of cats. And it turns out in 2017, there was this craze around CryptoKitties where volume peaked at about $2 million in one day for CryptoKitties. And guess how much percentage of the Ethereum transactions it took?
I think you bloated the entire chain, right? The CryptoKitties.
It did. Almost 12% of all of Ethereum transactions were CryptoKitties. And then it suddenly died right away. So it was this huge peak. It went through this hyperbolic growth and then it just crashed. To me, what it showed was what could NFTs become, right? You always see these lightning in the bottle moments where there's this sudden growth and then just craters. And I think that's one of the reasons why I started to become more intrigued about NFTs was because of that incident.
I remember USV invested in Dapper Labs back in the day. By the way, when I say Dieter Shirley's is the CTO of CryptoKitties, he's obviously the CTO of Dapper Labs, who built Flow.
Dapper Labs.
And I remember USV invested in Dapper Labs back in the day, 2017, 2018, and people were like, why did they invest in a freaking cats game? On-chain cats game. Obviously, they all missed the point. But
they got a lot of shit for it.
Exactly. And the NFTs games were actually the most obvious go-to-market for any layer one. That's why they invested in Dapper Labs, who eventually built the Flow blockchain.
I saw no other use cases for NFTs back then except for games. I was reading through my old articles that I published back then around 2018, and I only talked about games.
Same thing. I
never saw anything else.
I thought of NFTs as collectibles. I did not think of NFTs as digital identity, which, by the way, 5 years later, today, is the main thing behind apes and punks.
Yep. What was cool about it was, as I was reading EIP 721, there was a list of startups that were working on this concept. Some of the ones that I'll point out that you probably know is CryptoKitties, CryptoPunks, Rare Pepes, Decentraland are the ones that were the main ones. And there's a whole host of others that aren't there anymore. They failed or they don't exist anymore. But what was also interesting was while all of this was happening, you have EIP 721, you have these like cohort of startups that are trying to build like NFT standards or infrastructure around it. Then you have like OpenSea that just went through Y Combinator, and they were building the first marketplace for NFTs at the time.
I think OpenSea had at least 3 competitors that I know of back in the day.
They
but
did.
None of them managed to survive till
they ended up pivoting.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the volume was so low in OpenSea for so long that people didn't have enough, persistence or courage to continue building, and they ended up pivoting to other ideas that may have not worked out. But that's like the history, right? Like that's where it all kind of started.
By the way, there were NFTs before Ethereum. There were NFTs on Bitcoin. I don't know the exact history there, but I vaguely remember there were attempts.
There was an attempt. Yeah, I'll have to look more into it, but there was an attempt around it, but didn't really quite take off.
Yeah.
So from 2017 to 2020, we've seen this like huge like push for NFTs. We're seeing ecosystems being built out, incredible companies, etc., which I'll touch on. Before I touch on like what's happened since then, I say we go over high level of like what's happening on all the layer ones, just to get a good understanding of what each layer one is, what it does, and what types of NFTs are coming out of those ecosystems. I found probably 6 or 7 layer ones that I think are at least interesting for us to talk about, especially because I see so much of it on Twitter, and we have to put some facts around it. Turns out all-time volume for Ethereum NFTs has been roughly 30 billion, which is probably true. And a lot of it is driven by CryptoPunks, autoglyphs, rare pepes, and what I've seen with Ethereum community, unlike any other community, is that a lot of builders that are coming into the space from the NFT perspective are pure like missionary builders, right? They care about open source, they care about building the right community, and they use that as a lever to kind of build their own community and attract the right people. Second in volume is Ronin, Axie Infinity. They've done over about $4 billion in total NFT volume. And it's the idea everyone knows is pretty simple. You buy, mint, trade, breed Axies. It's part of the game. And that's the only NFT action that's happening. It's purely around Axie. Solana comes at 2.7 billion total sales volume. So primarily the way I've seen it was that it's primarily retail and speculators, right? So like unlike Ethereum where you do have some retail and speculators, but I consider Ethereum more the quality of the art is like for collectors,
yep.
Like genuine.
More collectors than speculators.
That's right.
On Ethereum. I heard the same thing about Solana, which is the opposite of Ethereum. More speculators, more volume on the new mints rather than existing collections. So that's interesting. I'm really surprised that Axie is number 2. Ronin is number 2.
I was surprised too.
Could it be that some of the NFT collections are not like where'd you get the data? Because indexing the NFTs is really tough.
Cryptoslam.io, which has data on all the chains. Okay. But what's interesting about Solana is, I mean, I've bought some NFTs on Solana and I'm down bad on many of them. Specifically, I bought like Solana Monkey Business because it's one of the first genuine communities. But Degen Apes is another one. But those two, I feel like, are forks or derivatives of Bored Apes.
Yeah.
So they have a pretty good community, but I don't think it's as genuine as the Bored Apes community or the CryptoPunks community.
Even between apes and punks, I feel like there is a difference.
Oh, absolutely.
I feel like the punks are a lot more genuine, authentic, missionary. But I might be biased.
No, you're right. Fortunately, unfortunately, Yuga Labs acquired CryptoPunks, which I'll talk a bit more about. Yeah. But 100% agreed with that thesis. But I will say this, though. Although Solana is primarily a speculative chain for trading NFT assets, I found that there is one community that resembles a lot like the Bored Apes community, or probably, I don't know about CryptoPunks, but Bored Apes for sure. It's called DeGods or Utes.
Yep.
Have you heard of those guys? Yeah. I went through like how they launched, and they were very community focused. They had some like glitches in the beginning where they accidentally didn't rug their users, but had a glitch where some of the users lost out on the mint. But over time, they redeemed themselves. They were at one point they were going to shut the project down, which was pretty interesting. But they ended up building this community, and now they're probably one of the most valued communities on Solana. They have their own token, they have their own marketplace, and most recently, which I'll touch on later, is like they went zero royalties as well. So there's something happening on Solana. I think it's more time is needed for other genuine communities to be built around it. Avalanche had about 400 million total NFT volume sales, primarily dominated by games. No, like, there's some speculative stuff happening, but it's primarily like games or farming of games.
Which one?
The top three, Krabata, which we heard about in the bull market, Yield Hunters, and Chicken. Chicken's probably the most recent one. That's like if you look at the past 30 or 60 days, the most volume right now is on Chicken. And Chicken is essentially a farmable game where you take your chicken, you stake your chicken, and then you get egg tokens. But I don't know of like the quality of the games, etc. But there's like the top three most highest volume NFT collections are all games on Avalanche. Polygon at 400 million, primarily gaming too. So you have Zedrun, if you remember Zedrun, it's like racing horses. Crypto unicorns, same thing. You have to breed unicorns, buy land, cultivate the land, feed the unicorns. But most recently, it was Reddit.
Yes. And
Reddit, as you know, had about $10 million in total trading volume or sales volume.
Only 10?
10, yeah. And then finally, I only bring this up because I hear it from a lot of like collectors about Tezos. But Tezos has some sort of like niche community of generative art. It's a marketplace called FX Hash. Has about $20 million of volume. Total has about 50 million. So not much, but I only bring it up because there is like a small group of collectors that admire the art there. So
speaking of Tezos, like we never spoke about Tezos, but
I don't think we've ever spoken about Tezos since they launched.
That's right. But Tezos seems to have a really interesting, at least special go-to-market, because I watch soccer. I watch European soccer, and my team is Manchester United, and they have Tezos, the Tezos logo on their jersey this season.
Interesting.
And I thought I was like, why did they pick Tezos? Like Tezos must be spending a lot of money to get into like the retail mind share. I was really surprised by that. But yeah, I'm not surprised that Tezos has their own niche of NFT collectors.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious what's happening on Tezos, to be honest. I remember the ICO, and since then I haven't heard much.
Their whole thing about NFTs was that they were, environment friendly. Because back then Ethereum was still on proof of work, and they used the USG as their initial go-to-market.
Got it. So those are high level of the layer ones and what's happening in those ecosystems. There's one more. Sorry, I forgot. Flow. Flow had 1.1 billion in total trading volume or sales volume. It's primarily driven by NBA Top Shots and NFL Top Shots.
Are they still active, or was it just a flash in the pan?
It's still active. Okay. No, they're still active. Volume has dramatically gone down since like the bull market, but people are still buying and selling NFTs on those two platforms.
I find it interesting that you said you got burned in the Solana NFTs. I looked at Bored Apes and Punks. They barely moved in pricing ETH. They've been pretty stable over the past year or so.
And that's reflective of the communities behind it, I think.
Yeah.
right? Like if you want a missionary community, then you'll have like a certain group of people that will just never sell, and you'll have some that want to really get into that community and will slowly accumulate those NFTs. We've seen this with CryptoPunks and Bored Apes over and over and over again over the past 12 months.
And it's analogous to Bitcoin, Ethereum. Like every bear market,
Yep.
Bitcoin, Ethereum are the ones that are down the least.
Yep. And so, yeah, that could be, those could be the blue chips, which I would agree with. And so that's what's happening. If you think about NFTs today, what breakout NFT do you think attributed to all of what's happening today?
It's got to be punks.
Yep. It's punks. And so I was like researching punks, and, there's some interesting history behind like generative art generally. Did you know that generative art was started about 50 years ago?
Okay. What was it? What was it back then?
Yeah. So the concept was to introduce randomness into art. There's this guy named Herbert Frank around early 50s. He used an oscilloscope, which is essentially a way to analyze waveforms of electronic signals. And he would use it, and then he would take a moving camera and take a picture of it. And then he would create randomness between the moving of the camera and then the wavelengths that would move on the oscilloscope. And that was like the starting of what would be known as generative art. Over the years, programming languages evolved, and people started becoming more accustomed to programming using like Fortran and BASIC. And they started to create, like starting the early foundation of generative art based on that by introducing randomness. And that happened throughout the 60s, 70s. And then in 2017, two guys started Lava Labs, and they launched what would be known as CryptoPunks. The aesthetics is supposed to remind us of like the early 70s punks. And they introduced an algorithm. So every time you would claim an NFT, the algorithm would generate, will pull together different traits through randomness and pull together this NFT that would become the NFT that you claim. When you claimed the NFT, it was free. There was no minting cost, completely free, and you just had to pay gas fees. That was really the start of CryptoPunks as it is today.
So many similarities with Bitcoin, right?
So many.
Punk is the Bitcoin of NFTs. This conception where basically a fair launch, right? There was no like whitelist or anything like that, right?
Nothing.
Anyone can participate, completely free. It was not an ICO, not a public sale. Even Ethereum does not fall under that category. Ethereum did an ICO, but Bitcoin was the one where you can just participate permissionlessly.
Yep.
And it was the OG. It was like basically, I mean, it's probably not the first NFT collection, but it's the one that really stood the test of time.
Yep. So this, with the launch of CryptoPunks, and in fact, it took, I think, months before all of it was claimed. So there were still like, the claiming process for CryptoPunks was ongoing for a very long time. And so that kind of showed that the people didn't really catch on to what was happening in the space. In fact, I found out about it much later, like 2019. So it took me a year and a half.
I certainly didn't hear about punks in 2017. It was all CryptoKitties back then.
Yeah. But it brought together like this core group of generative artists, because generative artists knew what was happening. And in particular, it brought in this guy named Snowfro. And Snowfro is a Mexican generative artist. He was part of the original CryptoPunks community. He probably holds about 60, 70 CryptoPunks to this day. And his idea was, could we create an algorithm and the output of the algorithm all on chain? And November 2020, he launched the first marketplace for generative art called Artblocks. And in parallel to that, he launched his own collection, which was called Chromie Squiggles. Hence why Chromie Squiggles is on a run most recently, right? It went from, I don't know, like 5 ETH to like 15, or now it's on around 13 ETH. I bought one of those when it first, not first came out, but a couple months. But I only bought it because I had no clue what was going on, and everybody was FOMOing in around it. I started appreciating generative art probably later on, but back then it was just more on the FOMO.
Yeah.
So that's the history between how art blocks got started and CryptoPunk got started. And the question I always ask myself is what makes generative art valuable? What do you think about generative art?
I don't get art. I don't get art as NFTs. I don't have the collector gene that you do. I have a lot of my friends who were in NFT early did have that collector gene. The only NFTs I really hold myself is punks and apes. But the way I view punks and apes, I don't view punks as generative art. I view punks as really this digital identity, digitally native identity. And the way I can explain this is the ultimate bull case for something like punks is this idea of digital nations. And you've probably all heard of this network states idea that biology has been pushing. Yeah, but it's fundamentally the same idea. You have holders of the punks NFT that eventually become the citizens of this new digital nation. And what they can do is they have treasury, potentially. Nouns DAO is probably the most... Nouns DAO is probably the epitome of this idea. But the NFT holders would hold... or they basically have on-chain ownership of the treasury. They can vote how the treasury should be used. They can potentially, make investments into various projects, build stuff for their community, but eventually even buy stuff in the physical world to really establish this idea of a digital nation. This is the ultimate bull case for PFPs, like PFP generative art or whatever, this whole idea of digital identity. Sometimes I feel like NFTs are more like DAOs than DAOs are. Like DAOs, most DAOs we know of today they have like a fungible token, ERC20, as their core way to share ownership and to distribute power, voting power. But I view NFTs even more as DAOs than the current DAOs are, because they offer something extra, which is the identity, the NFT. They're unique, right? Unlike fungible tokens, by definition, they're not unique. They're fungible with each other. And so this identity creates a sense of belonging to this digital nation. You really feel like you're a part of it, and you can express yourself to the outside world. And then sometimes people say DAOs are like corporations. Actually, I think DAOs are way more than corporations. Like the fundamental difference between DAOs and corporations is that when a corporation owns some assets, do they really own the assets? Like who guarantees the property rights? It's the broader legal system, right? It's their ownership of those assets is guaranteed by the social consensus of an entire country. Whereas if you're a DAO and you own some assets, you truly own those assets on chain. You actually have full ownership. Your property rights are not ultimately guaranteed by an entire country. Your property rights are fully on chain. They're guaranteed by the consensus of the chain itself. So the key difference between DAOs and corporations is property rights. And with property rights, truly native property rights, you can build digital nations. So that's how I think about this whole analog or concept behind PFTs as digital nations.
The idea makes a lot of sense in regards to, PFPs becoming digital nations. The question is always, what is the process of getting there? And I've seen many communities that have launched quickly where they didn't have the right transition path to doing that, and they ultimately failed. And so that's like one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is like, what is Bored Apes doing with their strategy of building this like digital nation? And maybe we're going to touch on this later, but high level, the way you think about Bored Apes is they're building this digital nation, and it's going to live in the metaverse. And so you have a group of collectors that bought into the NFT, and over time they want to manifest each of these digital identities into a world where everyone can communicate and coordinate, play games, etc. And so that's like the way that Bored Apes is thinking about it, or Yuga Labs is thinking about it. And I don't think any one community has figured out what this digital nation strategy would look like in the long run. But it's quite interesting to see how people are, carving out the path so that they can get to this kind of endpoint. I do know that, like, when you look at the PFP communities generally, people are all bounded by a single identity, like single meta identity, right? Like, I am bounded by where my family is from in India, right? And so when I go back there, everyone talks the same, they eat the same, etc. Now you have this on the internet, and the identity that's governing this new group of people is under the ethos of like the Bored Apes or the CryptoPunks, and they all have different like ways to communicate and talk, and different rights, whatever. But it's interesting to see some of this properties develop on the internet.
Yeah. So I mean, this whole idea of sense of belonging to a digital nation is by far my number one long-term bull thesis for any type of NFTs. But I want to talk about other NFTs with you as well. What are some of the other types of interesting types of NFTs that you've seen?
Yeah, so we touched on like profile picture NFTs, which is kind of where, maybe CryptoPunks started, and then Bored Apes launched. It was founded by 4 guys, Greg, Wiley, Zishan, and Kareem. And they launched it around April 23rd. Mint price was $240 or 0.0 ETH. They raised $450 million at $4 billion valuation by A16Z and many others. They launched their Ape token, which is currently sitting at around 4.7 billion. They used some of that capital to acquire the beloved CryptoPunks and Meebits IP from Larva Labs. There's this big contention, I don't know if you remember, between like Larva Labs and CryptoPunks holders, where the licensing was held by Larva Labs, and so each individual NFT holder didn't have the rights to their CryptoPunk, and it created a lot of contention. And so that was like one element. And then you see, other NFTs launching where they would either launch as a CC0 project, which I'll explain what that is in a bit, and or they'll give some rights to the IP to the individual holders. And so Yuga Labs ended up acquiring CryptoPunks and Meebits, and then they gave full commercial rights to the holders. But they won't transfer the full copyright to the holders. Just they have some commercial rights around it. And so CryptoPunks and Meebits community, they were pretty happy about that piece. I don't know if they're excited about Yuga Labs being the parent company behind CryptoPunks, but that's just the idea around CryptoPunks.
I saw an interesting project recently that where the punk or some of the NFT holders, I can't remember if it's punks or apes, but they're able to license the actual JPEG associated with their NFT to like brands like Nike or other fashion brands, where they can print the actual JPEG onto the sneakers or shirts or whatever.
Oh, that's cool.
So I thought that was really interesting because that told me that those NFT holders actually had some really interesting commercial rights. So they can monetize. They have actual ways to monetize the NFTs that they hold. Not just like flipping the NFTs, but they can actually generate some yield on it. So that's like where the commercial rights, who actually owns the commercial rights, matters.
It does. If you look at IP today, all the IP is held by large corporations or media companies. And in order for any end user to take advantage of that. The only way they could do that is by buying the products at the end of the day. But now if you become a semi-owner of the IP, these IPs could become more durable in the long run. I could see this becoming similar to like Disney, right? Mm-hmm. Where Disney has this very durable, century-wide like brand. I could see, these NFTs becoming like multi-generational, similar in that sense. So we've heard about CC0 licensing, Creative Commons. What is it actually? Like, if I want to purchase an NFT, what rights do I get? What rights do, other holders of other collections get? We can start off with the basics, right? If you know CC0, it's part of the crypto Creative Commons licenses framework, where they bring up, there's like 6 or 7 different sub licenses within that framework that ultimately govern how the content on the internet lives and who could use it and what they can use it for. It was introduced around the time when Web 2 was just starting to take off, or the internet was just starting to take off, and people were using songs and they were remixing them, or they were taking other people's like blogs or content and using it for their own distribution or for their own content. And so there's this framework in place now that controls who owns the content and how this content could be given away to others at no cost, so that it could become public domain, as an example. So the crux of this conversation can be around CC0, because this is where NFTs could become public domain, meaning that anyone can use it, and it's like a public good. And so what we're hearing a lot about is NFTs that use this standard or this framework as a way to kind of grow and increase the adoption. There were a couple early projects, I believe it was Toads and a couple others, that launched using the CC0 model. And the idea was very simple, is that if we allow it for public goods and everyone would use it, including brands, and brands would want to incorporate this as a way to increase the overall value of that community in itself. That was a basic thesis. I haven't seen anything take off yet based on that concept.
So when brands use those NFTs as public goods, they don't have to pay anything to the holders.
They don't. That's right.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about it, but Nouns DAO is under that concept for CC0. Mm-hmm. And you saw that on Super Bowl, right? There was a commercial and you saw the Nouns glasses in one of the videos. I forgot what they were promoting, mm-hmm. but it was a commercial, and they used the Nouns IP as a way to launch this commercial mm-hmm. during the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I can see that happen when you just let people permissionlessly use your IP. There's all sorts of interesting content can happen, and ultimately that's going to drive more attention to your IP, to your brand. And ultimately will increase the value of your NFTs. So I can totally see that happen. So it's the exact opposite of the example that I gave before, where the NFT holders sell their licenses or not sell their licenses, but they sell the right to use their NFTs to brands like Nike to print those JPEGs onto the sneakers. So it's a different way to monetize.
And I guess just going down the monetization route, and we'll talk more about Nouns DAO and what I call the youth system, because I think, or it's called the Y system, which offers a new dynamic in regards to how to manage IP. But monetization generally has been primarily around minting, royalties. You see merchandise being sold. There's like in real life events, but those are probably the most used monetization strategies for NFT communities. Mm-hmm. And then launching a token. No. And so those are like the 5 or 6 that I've seen that are common in terms of monetization. I don't know if I'm sold on any of them, to be quite frank. It just seems like a means to an end just to solve this like problem. I think royalties, like the ones who can really dictate or ask for royalties, are the ones that have created incredible art. Like if you look at like Tyler Hobbs Fidenzas or Ringers or CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, they can demand their own royalties, because people will gladly pay for the art and keep it. But where I don't see royalties working is for art or projects that haven't had the same level of success, but are also demanding fees so that they can monetize in their own way. And the reason why I say this is because I think the first has been explored, right? There are blue chips that have kind of won the space of either generative art or PFPs. Now, I think the pressure should be more about what can you do in those spaces and innovate. And interestingly enough, we're starting to see more and more innovation that's happening because of that. As you know, in the bear market, margins get compressed. And as margins get compressed, people are going to find ways to make it cheaper, easier, faster to get more users on their platforms. And so you started seeing this happen, especially on Solana, where you have a zero fee marketplace that opened up, right? And so what it ultimately ended up doing was it circumvented royalties from their user or from that would have gone to the creator, and completely made it to zero. So creators have now earned no NFTs that would go on, or royalties on that platform, whatever volume that's traded on that platform. And so then it forces these creators to think about what can we build, or what should we build so that I can start to earn revenue. Obviously, they make a bulk of their cash up front by minting fees, but ongoing, it really puts the pressure on what types of products these NFT communities should be building. I don't know if you have any thoughts around that, but some really cool examples I can give you of what projects are doing to circumvent that is like the Azuki community. So the Azuki community has built out this like loyalty platform. You can go on this website. So as long as you have this NFT, you can log in. It gives you cool stats. You're able to connect with other community members within the Azuki tribe. And it starts to build this like connectivity between members. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the right route, because as you mentioned, if NFTs are going to become these digital nation, then these digital nations need to talk and build like some sort of bond that adds the feel or sense of community. Mm-hmm. I don't think Discord is the right way to do that, because in Discord, especially when you leave your Discord open, you get a lot of spam and misinformation and other things that will really deter the community. In fact, Nouns DAO just decided to shut their Discord down as well.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that kind of gives you the idea.
So speaking of Azuki and Discord, I've been thinking about this a little bit. So like you and I have seen like so many like NFT social, apps, like chat apps or messaging apps, NFT gated, whatever. So there's so many of them. It's unbelievable. But I feel like they're all making the same mistake, in the sense that you provide a generic messaging app for every single like NFT communities, but I feel like the NFT communities want their own white label solution. Like they all have their own like identity. They all want to express their own preferences. I feel like the right approach is not to build like a Discord for NFT communities, but rather providing like an API SDK or something that's very customizable for each community to build on top of. Like you can go on to like Azuki website or Punk's website, and then you start chatting there rather than chatting like within Discord or a separate like messaging app, right? But anyway, I think there's a lot of opportunity for founders building white labeled solution for devs from NFT communities. So messaging is one, but there's also like NFT marketplaces, right? Like one of the problems with, let's say, Magic Eden or OpenSea is they're too generic. And on top of that, they charge a fee to every single one. Like every time you make any transaction, you pay a fee to OpenSea rather than the fee going back to the NFT community itself, right? So you don't capture as much value as if you had your own white label solution.
Yeah.
But anyway, point being, I think NFT communities want their own thing, especially the bigger ones, the bigger communities.
Yep. They want their own marketplace. They want their own messaging app. They want formally a way to connect in like real life events. So you're going to start to see at least where I see this all going is these communities are just going to spin out and become its own like cultural movement. And all of the products, all of what's being built will be built in-house as a way to retain ownership, as a way to extract value for the community, and all in the guise of building and growing the community at large. This reminds me a lot of like Nouns DAO model. And the Nouns DAO model is probably one of the most interesting communities in the space today. Nouns DAO, you could think of is semi-generative art. It's generative art, right? So every day, the concept of Nouns DAO is every day there's a mint. People bid on it. And once you are the final winner of the project, of the mint for the day, you purchase it for, let's say, 50 ETH. The 50 ETH would get transferred to the treasury. And collectively, all the people that hold the Nouns DAO NFT can manage the treasury together. I think it's sitting at like $40-50 million in ETH today. I was an early Nouns DAO buyer, top 30. And the idea resonated with me, at least, because the concept of being able to manage and vote on that treasury could, in the long run, become very powerful, especially for a brand like Nouns DAO, just because of the way it was started and using the premise of CC0 as a way to extend that brand to other ecosystems. I mean, like, if you really think about it, you could use that treasury to buy a gaming studio. I'm not saying that that could happen, but why couldn't it happen, right? And infuse that gaming studio with its IP and branding and create, killer games. And so that money that's just sitting and just growing over time will become the largest pull factor for people that want to be a part of that community. Even if you go down to like Nouns DAO forums, like there's hundreds of posts of people that just want access to that capital so that they could do something with it.
Yeah.
Whether it's a founder that's just building some sort of app that can bring something to the Nouns DAO community, to like events where there's like, let's say New York Fashion Week, let's create an event so we can attract designers to our community, stuff like that. And so you're starting to see like open source, like methodologies around money and capital as a way to grow, their own businesses or ideas, which I think is quite a new concept.
I'm really excited about those NFT projects that try to become digital nations. And by that, I mean, they have a very strong identity. Everyone wants to be part of it. A lot of people want to be part of it. And they have a treasury that they collectively own and manage. And Nouns DAO, out of all the NFT projects I've seen so far, is probably it fits those criteria the best. So I think that's going to be a big theme in the next 5 to 10 years. Even for us, Alliance DAO, ultimately we're going to become a digital nation.
Yep.
And same idea behind Nouns DAO. We want to build a community that a lot of people want to join, want to be part of, and have a treasury to manage. Right. I want to keep a close eye on this particular vertical of digital nations. Are there any other ones that you feel have the potential to become a digital nation so far?
You have the blue chips, right? So Artifacts, which is Clonax, Azuki's, Nouns, Punks, Apes.
I think one of the key criteria to becoming a digital nation is how well the community is governed. How do you feel about the governance model between Nouns or Punks or Azuki so far? Do you see any similarity, anything that they're doing well or not well? Like I went on Nouns DAO like forums, or I've looked at how they govern things and make proposals. I feel like it's still very messy.
It's very messy.
It's very active.
That's why I paused there.
It's very active, but it's like too decentralized for its own good.
It's very messy. And I mean, like, even Bored Apes really had no forums until they launched a token, right? So it was just a bunch of people on Discord that were, and Twitter and stuff like that. So I think that is like TBD in how that's going to be governed in the right approach. I haven't seen anything that I could say with confidence that is successful on the governance side.
Yeah.
But then again, if you think about like even in DeFi, what projects are governed really well? I mean, there are only a couple that I could name, like Aave, MakerDAO, Compound. That's about it. Mm-hmm. But those guys have been building since 2017, right? So anyone that's newer is going to take them a long time to figure out like who are the right stakeholders. Are they long-term permanent stakeholders? Or are they short-term stakeholders? How do we incentivize them? Do we give them salary, etc.? So these communities, I think, are like akin to like I don't know, a meteor crash or Big Bang of some sort. Like you need to have the right amount. Well, you know, this is actually an interesting topic. We're going to diverge a bit, but like Wi-Fi or Yearn, yeah. They had that Big Bang moment. Yes. And that is exactly what you want, right? You had, you know, thousands of people that were so excited about Yearn because Yearn was like one of the first, like, you know, decentralized yield aggregator that can take capital and use it in ways that other protocols couldn't.
And it was a fair launch.
It attracted.
It was not.
And it was a fair launch.
VC funded. It was fair launch. There's a strong leader. And building a useful product, at least back in the day.
Yep. And I remember, like, I was a part of it. We were a part of it. And it brought in a lot of talented people. And based on that, I seen how it went from like nothing to being really well governed over a very short period of time. They had their own struggles, don't get me wrong. But it brought in a lot of intellectual capital that helped them form a DAO governance that worked really well for Yearn. So you got to have that mind share. Otherwise, you're just going to have a bunch of speculators that want the price to go up. And typically in the NFT communities, that is what will happen.
Imran, I want to talk to you about the other types of NFTs. So we've talked about PFPs, generative art. We haven't really touched upon music NFTs, gaming NFTs, right? I want to talk about the long tail of NFT types and whether or not they actually make sense. Because throughout the history of crypto, there have been a lot of attempts to just apply crypto for the sake of applying crypto, and not everything really makes sense. So I'm curious what you think about like the long tail.
Yeah, let's talk about let's start with gaming NFTs. Gaming NFTs took the bulk of the mindshare in the bull market, especially with Axie, Infinity, and there's some other like sub communities like Crypto Unicorn and others. And the basic premise is you have to buy, two for an example of Axie Infinity, you'd have to buy 2 Axies, and you have to use SLP and Axie or AXS token to breed a new Axie. And then you could use this Axie as a way to play the game, or you could lend it to people and then they could play the game on your behalf, and then you can become like an ambassador that earns a cut of what the player is playing and earning from. You have Crypto Unicorn that is also similar, where you buy, you stake your Crypto Unicorns, you get like, I forgot the token's name, but you get a token in return. Then what you do with this token is, I think it's called Uni or Milk token. And then what you do is you breed 2 unicorns, and then you get a smaller, like a baby unicorn, and then you buy land, you cultivate crops, and you feed it, and it becomes bigger, and you earn more money in the long run, like Uni tokens. And then you have something new that's called like Limit Break, that is launched by Gabriel, who is pretty well known in the Web2 gaming space, that's launched some successful companies. And the idea of like free to own model, which essentially without like an example of this is like, you buy this NFT and this NFT will earn you more NFTs in the long run, and that will help you play different games. And the NFT that you first purchased could become valuable over time because you're getting access to all of this new NFTs within the game that will make the game more valuable in terms of experience. So you have some of these are like 3 different models that you're seeing within the gaming side. I don't know where it's going to go, to be quite frank, but I do know one thing, which is like if you look at games today, I can, click on an app and play a game. That's it. In most cases, the apps are free. And then there's like in-game purchases. If I want to level up, or if I want to win the game faster, or if there's new routes or new skins that I can use for my character. Otherwise, the game is free. So that friction point in playing the game is zero. Whereas with games like Unicorns and Axie, as an example, you have to buy into the game, which is the hardest part. Yes, the gaming asset you buy could be speculative and could go up in price, but it brings in the wrong type of users, right? You're bringing speculators versus people that are actually playing the game. And so what Limit Break is doing is, hey, this NFT is free. And then over time, that NFT could become more valuable by airdropping you skins and stuff that will make the game more valuable in the long run. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I think gaming NFTs in general just makes a lot of sense. It was the entire reason why Vitalik started Ethereum, by the way. Vitalik used to play.
Why?
Vitalik used to play World of Warcraft, and one day he noticed that one of his favorite characters got weakened by Blizzard, the developer of the game, and that's when he realized the danger of centralization. And at least that was his version of the Genesis story of Ethereum. And so it makes sense to turn those in-game assets in World of Warcraft into NFTs that the game developer has no way to really affect. Obviously, it's much harder than that because the game developers can potentially do other things to the NFTs, right? Like they can change the entire game loop in a way that basically the older NFTs are become less relevant in the new game loop. But at least that's the hope. That's the promise of turning in-game items into NFTs that the users truly own. So gaming NFTs make sense. As a retail collector and investor myself, I wouldn't own gaming NFTs for the hoping that they will appreciate over time. Mm-hmm. I would just hold the PFPs, the digital identity, the digital nations theme type of NFTs. And potentially those NFTs, like the punks and apes, they can be incorporated by games, right? Like, potentially the games can build on top of these NFTs. Maybe Yuga Labs themselves will build, they have been building games on top of their own NFTs, right? So in that sense, the in-game NFTs make sense. But anyway, that's a high-level thought. What do you think of music NFTs?
Yeah, music NFTs are interesting. We have a platform called Sound.xyz. And Sound.xyz, what they ultimately do is allow creators to monetize by giving away or minting, 30 mints of a certain song that they want to bring to the public. And it's a new way to monetize because what's happening in the space, I don't know if you got a chance to watch Spotify's documentary or like series about how Spotify got started. It's on Netflix. It's really good. It's called The Playlist. But the idea is very interesting, which is back then, if you remember, music was you had to buy a CD, and then you buy the CD, then you can listen to the song. Then the internet came, it became very popular, and you had like LimeWire or Pirate Bay where you could download music for free, listen to music. Creators didn't get paid. No one got paid. Regulators got really pissed. The large businesses got pissed, and there was no way to govern this or extract value because you can't do that on the internet. So Spotify came and said, hey, we're going to create this platform where you can charge. We're going to make it so easy to use that we will charge for convenience. And so ultimately over time, they bought into that idea. And now, Spotify has a very strong they have a very strong hold on creators today. Because in terms of monetization, they pay 0.04 cents a stream. And that's not a lot. It turns out that, a lot of creators they're unhappy with the amount they're making from Spotify. and they had to rely on licensing deals and other things to make the money that they used to make once they were on CDs. So that's the pendulum right now. That's the backdrop. So now let's come back to NFTs. NFTs could be a great way for musicians to monetize their art, especially like certain types of art. And then they could build a sense of community around this type of art by becoming closer to those fans that do buy these NFTs, right? You're already starting to see like this direct to consumer models, even when it comes to fans, right? Like with large artists, like there's so many artists that are out there that are tweeting or using Instagram as a way to form that like direct bond. Kevin Durant, who's like a pretty popular basketball player, created his own Discord channel for himself, and he left it open for everyone to join. So you're starting to see these two concepts starting to come together, which is how do I build a much closer relationship with my fans? And then two is how do I monetize directly without any middlemen?
Yeah.
And then the idea of NFTs become even more powerful when you think about it from that lens.
There are elements of what you said that I agree with, and there are elements I hold the opposite view. I don't find music NFTs that interesting. I think they will be a thing in the same way that you collect some limited edition, albums or CDs, right, of your favorite rapper. I think that will be a thing, but it won't be as big of a game changer as NFTs in games, or certainly not PFPs as digital nations. I think where the intersection between music and crypto will happen is not NFTs. It's the other point that you mentioned, which is the fan engagement. I don't think that has to do with NFTs, music NFTs per se, but you may have to do with the concept of DAOs, this community aspect of crypto. I don't know exactly what it is, but that's my gut feeling.
I would agree with that.
The problem with music NFTs is that the audio stuff, unlike the visual stuff, it's very hard to go viral, right? Like when you buy a punk, you hold a punk, you put that as your PFP on your Twitter profile. Yeah. It goes viral very quickly. Music is much harder to go viral because of the format of the file.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So, it could be, special limited edition music where, they're power fans. There's a term for it. I think it's called super fans, where super fans are very excited and will gladly spend, $100 for that song. And this gives them a sense of community with other super fans, right? That will then give them maybe special access to events. So if, let's say, this singer or rapper comes into your town, you get special access to that person, right? Yep. Anyone that's super fan would love to pay for that experience.
So it's almost access token rather than music NFT. Like you turn the NFT into an access token, access to the celebrity itself.
That's right. Now, there are conversations I've heard that, you could use music as a way to distribute, like you can give some IP rights. Yep. I don't know if I buy that because, IP rights for music at least is so contentious, especially watching and reading the history around Spotify. They'll never give up their IP rights. There's just no way, right? Maybe if you're an indie founder, indie musician, and you're like, fuck it, like I need to make money and I'll give up some of my rights. Yeah. Otherwise, if let's just say that is true and IP rights will become a thing, then the way I could see this being monetized in the long run is like you have these DAOs. The DAOs acquire the IP of the music NFTs. They become the sole distributor or become like regional distributor of this music, where they earn like fees for distributing that music or licensing that music out to other types of collections or movies or whatever. And then over time, like the money that you return from the DAO, you could ultimately become your own production company or your own record company where you start to acquire talent. And then, you become this like pseudo recording distributor DAO that ultimately returns all of the fees back to the community holders that own a token in that DAO type of thing.
I think I agree with you. The idea of turning music IPs into NFTs, it's okay, but it doesn't really solve a hair on fire problem.
There's no hair on fire problems being solved from this. Oh, but here's a fun, interesting story. Snoop Dogg bought Death Row Records if you know Death Row Records, it's one of the oldest record companies in rap. And Snoop Dogg recently purchased it, and he pulled it from Spotify. He pulled it out of Spotify, and he said that he's going to create NFTs around it.
Interesting,
is what he said. So I don't know what that means and how he's going to do it, but he has dropped music on Sound.xyz before.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know what he's thinking. I've tried to like do more research, but he was very like quiet about what he was thinking about doing with it. Mm-hmm. So I guess we have to wait and see of what's going to happen with that. But he did mention like money was the biggest reason why he pulled it from Spotify. And this could be the eventual exodus for like large fans or large musicians with large fan base, because they really have leverage. And now that they see a platform where they can monetize, we may see an exodus of musicians leaving Spotify and others to start to directly monetize their own content.
What do you think of story IPs? There have been a couple of projects building storytelling IPs, decentralized storytelling. I don't know exactly how they work, but that's the marketing language. In our last cohort, we had one project called the Story Protocol that we're also building in this area. But obviously, they're also trying to figure this stuff out. There's still a lot of unknowns. But what do you think of that vertical in general?
Very bullish. At least in South Korea and like Southeast Asia, it's very popular to contribute your own, like to read like short stories.
Yeah, the webtoons.
The webtoons, K-pop. This whole like area that the people in the US or Europe or other places are not exposed to. Mm-hmm. Is actually thriving. And typically like whatever happens in like those areas is usually a precursor for what's going to happen for us, right? Like even with anime, like I'm a big anime fan, but anime has been around since like the 60s, 70s, right? And it's just started getting popular in the 90s here in the US and later. Mm-hmm. So I do think like contributing stories or contributing to a story and then over time owning that IP as a way to build royalties and reward the user that contributed a story is very powerful.
I think where NFTs and storytelling will cross over is not turning the stories into NFTs, but the characters and the items in those stories into NFTs.
Or why not both?
Yeah. The problem with turning stories into NFTs is it has the same problem as music NFTs. Like it's a bunch of text.
Yeah.
It's hard to go viral. But if you create a really good story that a lot, like think Marvel, right? Like if you're able to create a story that billions of people around the world really love, then naturally, if you turn those characters from those stories into NFTs, there's a good chance for those NFTs, for those characters to turn into this digital nation theme, right?
Yep.
Again, like it's the whole story is about PFPs and digital nations, not NFTs or turning like story IPs into NFTs or music into NFTs, but the characters in the stories.
The common theme I'm hearing is everything is going to become its own like nation on the internet, whether it's a nation around musicians, whether it's nations around gaming, whether it's nation around PFPs. We're going to start to see like these sub communities that will grow much larger than a subreddit, as an example, that will live and breathe in the real world.
And people would say, why are you hyping up this whole digital nation thing? Like, why isn't it just called community? Like, all these like Nouns DAOs or whatever, they're just communities. Like they're no different from like Reddit communities or Discord communities. Yeah. Well, the key difference pre-crypto and post-crypto is that pre-crypto, those communities don't have their digitally native treasury that they can manage and own.
Yeah.
With crypto, you have treasury.
Very good point.
That you can own and govern and potentially buy stuff in the physical world, such as land, real estate, or whatever. You can actually turn yourself into a digital nation that owns some assets that have your own digitally native property rights. That's the key difference between pre-crypto era and post-crypto era.
So it's all about the Benjamins. It's cool. I'm going to touch on a couple others, which is, metaverse NFTs like Decentraland and Somnium. I don't think we need to go crazy here because it's essentially just digital land that you're purchasing in these metaverses. And the concept of scarcity is completely removed. And so the idea and concept is like, can you build something valuable that would allow people to be pulled into these ecosystems? So like I've played with Somnium, I played with Decentraland, I hung out there for hours, not hours, but like an hour, just to get a understanding, a feeling of why people use these communities. And so far what I've seen is people are using this as a way to host like online events, right? And that's it, right? And then people are building stuff, whatever. So you have that. You have something called On Cyber, which I think it's more interesting because On Cyber is essentially a metaverse where you showcase your art that you've collected with the PFPs. And, people love going to museums because they appreciate the aesthetics, being able to see the actual art can go a long way, and then learning more about the history. And so Punk 6529 launched his own collection on Cyber. He has a great collection, by the way. And so I've used it as a way to just check out his content. I could have just gone to OpenSea and done the same thing. But the idea probably is going to be like you're going to wear like a headset, right? And then you're able to appreciate the art. Like when I mean by headset, like a Quest from Meta, etc., tying into like our Meta session a couple sessions ago. And then you're fully immersed into this art and then be able to appreciate the art. Like I don't think I'll do that. Like I'm pretty good with just going on OpenSea. But in the future, if everyone's wearing, these goggles or the headsets, then I think it makes sense.
So Imran, finally,
yep.
Give me your top 5 NFT collections that you want to hold for the next 2 to 5 years.
Oh my God. 2 to 5. Autoglyphs.
Okay.
CryptoPunks. Azukis. Artifacts. And I'll throw out 2 more. Fidenzas and Meebits.
So most of them are actually art.
Yeah, I have a high appreciation for art. Generative art. Yeah. But I also like some of the PFPs like CryptoPunks, Meebits, Artifacts, Azukis. I was a Bored Ape holder in the early days when I first launched, but a lot of stuff they did, to peak of the bull run towards the end.
After you heard the Eminem Snoop Dogg rap, you just dumped it. rage dump.
That was a horrible music video. Horrible. Like I wanted to throw up. I mean, yeah, but yeah, those are mine, and I mean those are ours. So, it's a couple of interesting stuff, right? Like Chain Runners, is building completely on the CC0 concept, and so they have this like crypto, like it's called. They're like a punk that live in this like dystopian world, and there's a game behind it, and then you can mint a 3D avatar. So there's some really cool stuff happening within the Chain Runners community. And then the final is like what's happening with Art Gobblers. It's a Paradigm co-created this project with the creators of Rick and Morty. And the idea is that, you use really cool game economics, game theory, and a way to like incentivize artists to create art, marry the two together to create something very different. And so the way to think about this is that, people were on this whitelist, they're airdropped this NFT, which is the Gobbler NFT. So as long as you hold that NFT, you accrue more GOO tokens. The more you accrue this GOO tokens, you could use that as a way to purchase more art by Art Gobblers. And then over time, you can use this as a way to customize the main NFT. So you could think of it as like a canvas, right? And then the art that you can purchase could be then used like for your canvas type of thing. I'm probably not saying it all the way correctly, but that's the high level concept of it, which I think that's really cool. Like the longer you hold, you're incentivized to get more GOO tokens, and use that GOO token as a way to buy more art makes a lot of sense.
That's very cool.
So those are some of the things that I'm most excited about recently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm other than the art stuff, I agree with everything else. I'm again, like I'm very excited about this theme of digital nations. I think whichever NFT collections that have the potential to become that, I will be paying attention. So Nouns DAO, Punks, maybe Apes. Those are my interests.
Likewise. Well, I think we're at the top of the hour here. Great talk. Went pretty deep on the NFT side. Again, thanks for joining our show, and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to Good Game. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.